Imagine two neighbors. They live on the same street in the same country in the same year. The first neighbor earns $180,000 a year. He drives a leased luxury SUV. His home has 4 bedrooms, 2 of them empty. His weekends are spent scrolling real estate listings, not because he needs to move, but because he always suspects somewhere better exists. He checks his net worth against LinkedIn profiles of people he went to university with. He is never quite satisfied. He is never quite enough. At the end of every year, despite the salary, despite the title, despite the house with the 2 empty rooms, he has accumulated almost nothing. The money arrives and it leaves, almost on schedule, as if the income were designed to require exactly that much spending to sustain it. The second neighbor earns $54,000 a year. She cycles to work. Her apartment is small and deliberately so. Everything in it has a purpose. On weekends, she walks in the forest. She cooks. She repairs things. She owns very little but feels, in a way she struggles to explain to people from different cultures, that she already has everything she needs. Her savings rate is 38%. She has never described herself as frugal. She has described herself, without irony, as rich. Same country. Same year. Same laws and grocery stores and weather. 2 completely different relationships with the concept of enough. Here is the financial truth that the second neighbor has already absorbed, and the first neighbor may never learn. Wealth is not a number at the top of your income. It is the distance between what you have and what you need. The first neighbor collapsed that distance to 0, not through poverty, but through wanting. The second neighbor made that distance enormous, not through deprivation, but through a philosophical tradition she was handed at birth and never thought to question. That tradition has a name. It comes from Scandinavia, and it may be the most powerful financial concept most people in the English-speaking world have never seriously considered. Today, we are going to walk through what the Scandinavians actually believe about money, why those beliefs produce outcomes that look like magic from the outside, the specific named principles that make up this philosophy, and what it would mean to genuinely apply them. Not as a lifestyle trend, but as a complete reorientation of how you relate to enough. The systemic indictment. Before we can understand why Scandinavian financial culture works, we need to understand what it is working against. Because the problem is not that people in other cultures are weak or undisciplined. The problem is that most people are swimming inside a system specifically designed to prevent them from ever feeling like they have enough. The modern consumer economy does not profit from your satisfaction. It profits exclusively from your dissatisfaction. The infrastructure of modern life has been engineered to remove every natural moment of hesitation between want and purchase. Tap to pay eliminates the physical sensation of money leaving your hands. One-click purchasing removes the journey that used to give desire time to cool. Next-day delivery eliminates the waiting period that used to allow reflection. Each of these is a deliberate design choice made by organizations that understand human psychology better than most psychologists, and that profit directly from your impulse. There is a well-documented psychological phenomenon called the pain of paying. When humans exchange physical cash for goods, their brains register something measurably similar to mild physical pain. That pain is information. It tells you that a real exchange is happening. Modern payment systems have systematically eliminated that friction. We spend more because spending no longer hurts. And then there is comparison. Social media has given every person a curated feed of the most aspirational moments of the most aspirational people in their network. The benchmark for enough is no longer set by your actual needs or your community. It is set by an infinite scroll of people presenting the best version of their best days. The result is predictable, a feeling of perpetual inadequacy at every income level. This is not a character flaw. It is the designed output of a system that requires your dissatisfaction to function. The Scandinavians built something different, not because they are genetically superior or naturally more disciplined, but because they developed over centuries a set of cultural norms that insulate against this exact trap, refined and transmitted through generations until they became invisible, ordinary, unremarkable. Just the way things are. Let us look at what they built. The cultural revelation. Scandinavia, the countries of Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Finland, consistently ranks at the top of every global index measuring human well-being, happiness, and financial security. The World Happiness Report has listed Denmark, Finland, Iceland, and Sweden in the top 5 for more than a decade. The OECD consistently finds Nordic countries at the top of financial security rankings. These are not wealthy nations in the way we usually mean wealthy. They don't have the highest GDP per capita in the world. But they have something rarer, populations where people feel by enormous majorities that they have enough. This outcome does not come from their tax structures, though those are often discussed. It does not come from their geography or their winters. It comes from a set of deeply embedded cultural beliefs about what money is for, what wealth means, and, most importantly, what the word enough actually points to. The Swedish have a word for it, lagom, pronounced L-A-H-gom. It translates imperfectly as just the right amount, not too much, not too little, exactly enough. The word appears in everyday Swedish speech constantly, in context that would surprise an outsider. The coffee is lagom hot. The meeting was lagom long. The apartment is lagom sized. It is not a compliment meaning mediocre. It is a precise description of a desirable state, the state of sufficiency, of having exactly what is needed and nothing beyond it that creates burden. Lagom is the philosophical foundation of Scandinavian financial culture. And once you understand it as more than a word, as a complete orientation toward consumption, comparison, and contentment, the financial outcomes of Nordic countries stop looking miraculous and start looking inevitable. Today, we are going to walk through 7 principles embedded in Scandinavian culture that together constitute a complete financial philosophy. Not tips, not hacks, a worldview. We are going to show you how to stop living in perpetual inadequacy, not by earning more, but by understanding enough. The philosophy unpacked. Principle 1. Lagom. The philosophy of enough. Lagom is not a budgeting technique. It is a prior question, what a question asked before any financial decision is made. What is the right amount of this? Most financial thinking begins with desire and then applies constraint. I want this. Can I afford it? The lagom framework inverts this. It begins with sufficiency. What would be enough of this? Not the maximum I could have, not the minimum I could survive with. The right amount for this moment, for this purpose, for this life. Applied to housing, lagom asks not, what is the largest home I can qualify for a mortgage on? But, what is the right size for the life I actually live? The average Swedish apartment is significantly smaller than an equivalent American dwelling. This is not poverty. Sweden's median income is comparable to the United States. It is a cultural consensus that more space than you use is not a luxury. It is a burden. Applied to possessions, lagom produces a natural minimalism, not from aesthetic preference, but from philosophical consistency. Every object beyond what you need is an object you are now responsible for. It must be stored, maintained, insured, cleaned, and eventually disposed of. More than enough is not more than enough. It is more than you wanted to manage. The financial implication is compounding. Every decision made through the lagom lens, the car that is right-sized rather than aspirational, the wardrobe that contains what gets worn rather than what was on sale, the home that fits life rather than impresses neighbors, creates a gap between income and spending. That gap, accumulated over years and decades, becomes freedom. Principle 2. Janteloven, the liberation of not comparing. Janteloven is one of the most unusual cultural phenomena in the developed world. Literally the law of Jante, named after a fictional Danish town created by author Axel Sandemose in 1933, it describes a set of unwritten social norms that Scandinavian culture has long both embodied and critiqued. Its 10 unofficial rules all express a single idea. You are not better than anyone else, and displaying yourself as such is a social transgression. From a purely individualist perspective, Janteloven can look like enforced mediocrity, but its financial effects are profound and mostly positive. In cultures governed by Janteloven norms, conspicuous consumption is not aspirational. It is mildly embarrassing. Driving a more expensive car than your neighbors is not impressive. It is slightly awkward. Renovating your kitchen to a standard well above the street's average draws attention you may not want. This social norm removes one of the most powerful psychological engines of lifestyle inflation: status spending. In cultures where what you display signals your worth, the pressure to spend on visibility is enormous and relentless. In cultures where that display is subtly discouraged, the pressure evaporates. You are freed from needing to perform wealth, and the money that would have been spent on that performance, as the newer car, the louder holiday, the obviously expensive jacket, stays unspent. It is worth being direct about what janteloven is not. It is not an argument against ambition or excellence. It is an argument against the specific form of consumption designed purely to signal superiority. Strip out the performance of wealth, and what remains is the actual experience of wealth. Security, freedom, time, choice. The Scandinavians spend on those things. They simply decline to spend on the performance. Principle 3. Friluftsliv. Wealth in what cannot be bought friluftsliv. Pronounced friluftsliv, Norwegian for open-air life. But the translation misses what the concept actually means. Friluftsliv is a philosophical stance that genuine well-being is found in access to nature, physical activity, and simplicity, and that these things are by design available to everyone, free of cost. The concept of allemannsretten, every person's right, legally guarantees Norwegians access to uncultivated land regardless of ownership. Hiking trails are maintained as public infrastructure. The best things in Norwegian life culturally are explicitly non-purchasable. The financial mechanism is substitution at scale. When a culture's primary sources of pleasure and social connection are free by design, the portion of income that must be spent to achieve contentment shrinks dramatically. You do not need a resort holiday when the forest is 10 minutes away. You do not need the expensive gym when the mountain is where you already go. This is not frugality as sacrifice. It is a cultural infrastructure that makes the high-cost version of leisure seem redundant by providing the high-quality version for free. A $54,000 income in Norway can fund a life that, in experiential terms, competes with a $120,000 income in a culture where every source of enjoyment requires purchase. Principle 4. Hygge, contentment without consumption. The Danish concept of hygge, pronounced hygge, has entered global consciousness in recent years, often reduced to a lifestyle aesthetic of candles and wool blankets. This reduction misses the financial philosophy embedded inside it. Hygge describes a quality of togetherness and comfort found in simplicity. A warm room, close company, unhurried time, food made at home. It is not a product category. It is an answer to the question, where does contentment actually come from? And the answer is not from novelty, not from spectacle, not from expense, but from presence, warmth, and the ordinary made intentional. The financial implication is that the most hygge activities, a meal cooked and shared at home, an evening with friends that costs nothing, a Sunday morning that has nowhere to be, are either free or extremely low cost. And in Danish culture, these activities are not a consolation prize for when you cannot afford the expensive version. They are genuinely preferred. The expensive restaurant is not considered more hygge than the kitchen table. In many cases, it is considered less so. Consumer culture profits from the belief that the best experiences must be purchased, that home-cooked is inferior to restaurant-cooked, that a weekend at home is a weekend wasted. Hygge is a direct cultural counter-argument, an insistence backed by centuries of tradition and genuine contentment, that the most valuable experiences are not for sale. When you genuinely believe this, not as a budget strategy but as a truth about what actually produces well-being, your relationship with spending transforms. You stop trying to purchase contentment. You start creating it. And creation is almost always cheaper than purchase. Principle 5. Forvalterskap. You are a steward, not an owner. Forvalterskap is a Norwegian concept that translates roughly as stewardship. It describes the idea that the resources in your care, your money, your home, your land, the natural world, are not truly yours to consume. You are managing them on behalf of those who will come after you. This concept is rooted in Scandinavian Lutheran tradition and in the practical reality of communities that, for centuries, depended on careful resource management for survival. It has evolved into a cultural attitude toward consumption that is deeply different from the ownership mentality dominant in much of the Anglophone world. In a stewardship framework, the question, "Can I afford this?" is supplemented by a second question. What does acquiring and eventually disposing of this cost the world? This is not primarily an environmental argument, though the environmental implications are significant. It is a psychological and financial one. Stewardship thinking slows consumption at the point of acquisition because you are considering not just the pleasure of having, but the responsibility of owning and the eventual burden of release. The Scandinavian secondhand market is, per capita, one of the largest in the world. Finland's flea markets and Sweden's clothing exchanges are not the domain of those who cannot afford new. They are ordinary shopping behavior across all income levels, driven by a cultural ethic that treats perfectly functional items as resources to be circulated, not waste to be discarded and replaced. The financial effect: a dramatically lower rate of replacement purchasing. When you are stewarding resources rather than consuming them, you repair before you replace, maintain before you acquire, and release thoughtfully rather than discarding and repurchasing. The lifetime cost of ownership drops substantially. Your money stays with you instead of cycling back to manufacturers on a schedule they engineered. Principle 6. Arbeidsglæde, the economics of meaningful work. Arbeidsglæde, like a Danish word pronounced arbeidsglæde, means work joy. It describes happiness found in meaningful, purposeful work, and points to a relationship between work and income that is fundamentally different from the one most high-income cultures cultivate. In much of the consumer world, work is endured to fund the life. The life happens on evenings and weekends. The suffering of work is the price you pay for the pleasure of spending. This creates a self-reinforcing loop. The more you dislike your work, the more you spend to compensate. And the more you spend, the more income you need, which often means more unpleasant work, creating more compensatory spending. Arbeidsglæde breaks this loop by questioning the premise. Danish workplace culture, consistently ranked among the most positive in the world by OECD research, actively cultivates meaning, autonomy, and collaborative satisfaction. The result is a population that genuinely enjoys its working hours rather than enduring them. The financial consequences rarely discussed. When work is not suffering, compensatory consumption is unnecessary. You do not need the expensive holiday to recover from a year that broke you. You do not need the luxury purchase to reward yourself for surviving a quarter you hated. A significant portion of consumer spending in high-income cultures is psychological medication, and the pharmaceutical is unnecessary when the underlying condition is treated. Principle 7. Lagom igen, the practice of enough in numbers. We return to lagom for the final principle, but now applied specifically to the practice of financial tracking. Scandinavian households, particularly Swedish and Norwegian ones, have among the highest rates of financial literacy and household budget tracking in the developed world. According to Statistics Sweden, more than 60% of Swedish households maintain some form of regular household financial tracking. This is not driven by anxiety about money. It is driven by the same principle that governs everything else. You cannot have the right amount of something you are not measuring. The practice is simpler than it sounds. Not apps necessarily. Not complicated spreadsheets. Often just the regular, deliberate act of knowing what comes in, deciding what to save first, and consciously allocating the rest. The Swedish version of the practice shares much with the Japanese kakebo, the monthly sitting down, the honest accounting, the gap calculation. But where the Japanese practice tends toward daily tracking and minute categorization, the Swedish tendency is toward simplicity. Know your number, pay yourself first, live on the rest. The financial outcome of this practice at scale is visible in the data. Sweden's household savings rate consistently runs above 15%, compared to approximately 3 to 4% in the United States and United Kingdom. This is not because Swedes earn dramatically more. It is because a higher percentage of Swedish households have, through cultural practice, made saving the first expenditure rather than the last. The proof and contrast. The data on Scandinavian financial outcomes is not ambiguous. According to the OECD Better Life Index, Denmark, Norway, Finland, and Sweden consistently score highest globally on household financial security. Denmark's household debt is almost entirely mortgage debt on appreciating assets, not consumer debt. Sweden's household savings rate consistently runs above 15%, compared to approximately 3 to 4% in the United States. Norway's sovereign wealth fund, built from oil revenues that could easily have been consumed, exceeds $1.7 trillion, a national embodiment of the lagom principle. We have more than enough, and so we steward it for those who come after. But let us return to our two neighbors. The first neighbor, $180,000, 2 empty bedrooms, perpetual inadequacy, is the statistical average output of a consumer culture that measures success by income and spends to confirm that measurement. His wealth ratio is near zero. If his income stopped tomorrow, his life would begin collapsing within 3 months. The second neighbor, $54,000, the bicycle, the 38% savings rate, is the output of a culture that measures success by freedom and spends to protect it. She could sustain her life without income for years. She owns choices that her neighbor, despite his 3 times higher salary, does not. She is, in the only meaningful sense of the word, wealthy. Wealth is not a number at the top of your salary. It is the ratio between what you have and what you need. Every logom decision widens that ratio, and every widened ratio purchases something the salary cannot: freedom. Every dollar you do not spend is not money you lost. It is an employee you hired. It will go to work for you tomorrow without complaint, without requiring management. You are not living smaller. You are building a workforce. The personal transformation. Invitation. Here is what changes when you genuinely adopt the logom framework, not as a lifestyle aesthetic, not as a temporary budget challenge, but as an honest reorientation of what enough means. You stop shopping for relief. Most discretionary spending in high-income cultures is emotional spending. Not the purchase of things you need, but the temporary relief of anxiety through the act of acquiring. When you have a genuine relationship with enough, the anxiety that drives that spending shrinks. You are not depriving yourself. You are removing the need that the spending was failing to meet. You stop comparing upward. Janteloven is not a rule you follow. It is a permission you grant yourself. Permission to stop measuring your life against the curated highlights of people whose actual finances you know nothing about. The person with the expensive car may be financing it on a payment that is slowly dismantling their future. The couple with the renovation may have borrowed against their home to fund it. You do not know. More importantly, it does not matter. Their enough is not your enough. You start measuring what actually matters. Your spending, when you look at it honestly, is a ledger of your values. Not your stated values, your actual values, expressed in numbers. If you say that freedom matters to you more than status, and then you spend on status and save nothing toward freedom, the ledger is telling you the truth about who you currently are, and showing you who you could become. The path does not require a Scandinavian passport. It requires a prior question. Ask before each significant decision, what would be enough of this? Not the most, not the least, the right amount. You already know what that feels like in other areas of your life. Logom is just the practice of extending that knowing to money. The challenge and the call. Here is your challenge. For the next 7 days before any purchase that is not a survival necessity, food, shelter, medication, transport, ask one question before you complete it. Not, can I afford this? You probably can. Ask instead, is this logom? Is this the right amount? Not the maximum I could justify, but the amount that is genuinely enough? Write the question down somewhere you will see it. On the screen of your phone, on the mirror, on the card you pull out to pay. Let it interrupt the automatic sequence between desire and purchase. That interruption, that small, deliberate friction, is the beginning of a different relationship with money. At the end of 7 days, look at what you chose not to buy. Not with regret, with curiosity. Notice what you wanted and then didn't want once you waited. Notice how often enough was actually less than you initially reached for. Notice whether anything you declined was something you actually missed. Then, in the comments, do 2 things. Name the one area of your life where you already practiced logom without thinking about it. The thing you already have just the right amount of, and feel no pull to upgrade. And then write this. Enough is not settling. Enough is arriving. Because that is what the Scandinavians understood in the rain and the winters and the long practice of living well on what was available. The destination was never more. The destination was always enough. And enough, it turns out, is where freedom lives. If this changed how you see the word enough, subscribe. We will keep going.